Good evening, Virginia Annual Conference. I would like to welcome everyone joining us here today as we are gathered together as we get ourselves ready for the PRG Relaunch webinar. I would like to share some of the announcements as we are coming. What we will do is we did not allow chat to come because we have we have 500 who registered, and we're still having people coming in. But one way for us to answer your questions, I would say to go down to your bar and you will see that there's a question and answer feature. If you have a question as we are presenting these materials, I wanted to ask you to use the question and answer feature to present a question. If this is a question that we had already answered, we have a dedicated member who is on our team who will be answering those questions. If this is a question that we hear a lot, we will have a time to answer your questions during the time of the Q&A. But I want to welcome everyone once more for your time. We are thankful that you are here. And we know that there's a lot of materials that we would like to cover. So with that said, I wanted to start our time. Before we start, what I wanted to do is I wanted to share a short verse. And this verse is actually one of the favorite verses that I have. And this is the verse that I cling on to more often during this time as we are preparing to re-enter into the new normal. And it comes from Romans chapter 8, verse 28, where it says, "And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." The reason why I like this is not only because of the first part of when God says, when Paul says, "And we know that all things God works for the good." I'm not only alluding to that, which is also a very encouraging Bible verse. But my attention these days had been more focused on to those who love God and those who have been called according to God's purpose. We so often forget that we are called for God's purpose. We are all called together in this community of faith, so-called the United Methodist Church, because we're called to share and make disciples for the transformation of this world. And because of what is happening in the circumstances that are surrounding us, I believe that sometimes if we do not have each other to remind us of that call, it will be very difficult for us. And we're here not only to answer the questions that you might have regarding the new TAM, which is now called TAM Phase 3. I think this is a time where we come together as we prepare for our relaunch, that we really need to remember that we are all called for God's purpose, and we have each other for us. So what I wanted to do in this time is I wanted to have us start with a prayer, but I did not want to just have one person lead our prayer. I wanted us to all devote at least 5 to 7 minutes to pray together. This actually comes from one of my conversations with another colleague. And the colleague had challenged me. If you're really preparing the churches for the relaunch, how often do you pray when we get together? In our practice as United Methodists is to start our meetings with a prayer and probably end it with a prayer, right? But I wanted to ask, how often do we allocate time in our meeting to pray? So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to allocate at least 5 to 7 minutes for us to really pray. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to pray for 3 things. I wanted us to pray, number 1, for us to remember that we are called for God's purpose. Number 2, what I wanted to do is I wanted us to pray for the spirit and the wisdom to guide us in this time as we prepare for a relaunch in ministry. And number three, I would like to ask us to pray for one another and also the 1,175 churches in our Virginia Annual Conference. So the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to play some music on the background. I'm going to focus us in a time of prayer, and I'll call out this prayer request in the order of that I had shared. And I'd like you to pray wherever you are, whether you pray out loud or you pray in silence. Join us in this community of faith as we pray together. So join me as we focus our hearts for prayer. Let us have a time to pray. Lord, we thank you for this time that we can come together, coming together under the same call and the same purpose, coming together as we are united under this call to make disciples. And as we are all here to prepare and seek your wisdom, we ask that you will once more use your Holy Spirit and pour out your Holy Spirit upon us so we can remember our call and our purpose. Sisters and brothers, now join me in this time of prayer. Now I'd like to encourage us to pray and seek God's wisdom, asking, Lord, give us your guidance and give us your wisdom as we are preparing for this relaunch of our ministries, the new normal, and remembering how you are leading to continue to be a blessing unto this world. Let's have a time to pray together. As we continue our prayers, I would like us to intercede and pray for all the churches in Virginia Annual Conference. That we can remember that we're connectional. Remember that we are all in this together. To remember that we are united as one and to be an encouragement for one another. So let us have a time to pray together. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for this time that we come together and we can pray. We know that nothing is impossible when you answer our prayers, that our prayers be accepted. And may you lead us as we come together in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you for joining us. And now we are inviting District Superintendent Douglas Forrester to share some of his thoughts. And I'm sorry, we wanted to start with a poll. So Heather's gonna introduce the poll and we will have a time to come together. So Heather, can you help us out?
Hello, Virginia Conference. It's so good to be with you tonight. I enjoy the presence of my panelists, and we are looking forward to finding out more about how things are in this conference. You know, a big step in knowing where we are going is finding out where we are. And so we're going to start tonight with a poll. We would like for you to help us in finding out where we are. This will be a poll that's going to find out more about vaccinations. And where we are in having vaccinated people participating in indoor settings. So in this poll, we're going to have three options. The first option is our church has approved fully vaccinated people to be unmasked indoor settings. Again, that's indoors. So our church has approved fully vaccinated people to be unmasked indoors. The second is our church has chosen to remain fully masked indoors at this time. And the third is our church is currently discerning this. We may have churches that are still meeting in committee and finding out where they need to be based on their setting. So we'd like for you to take a minute to fill out the poll as it comes up. I think RJ is going to help us out with that. And you'll be given a good 90 seconds to 2 minutes to select your answer, and then we'll let you know the results.
So yes, the poll is already up, and I believe that we have 192, 200 who just voted. And we'll give probably, like Heather had said, good 30 seconds. So just bear with us as we are just want to see where you all are. And this could also be a practice for our annual conference that is coming on June 18th to the 19th. So we have almost 270 people who had joined the poll, and we will be ending the poll in 10 seconds. So this is a result of our poll. We have 36% of our churches who are allowing unmasking, and 21 who had chosen to fully mask, and 43% of our churches are still discerning. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us and letting us know where you're at. Now, Doug will help us to understand the cabinet's decision.
Thank you, RJ, and thank you to everyone, brothers and sisters, for being here this evening. It's good to be with you. And what I want to do for just a few minutes is look back for a second and then look to where we are now and then look forward. Bishop Lewis's vision, as you know, is for the Virginia Conference to be and to cultivate lifelong learners who influence others to serve. And that vision has in so many ways directed how the back to in-person worship and the mission and ministry teams operated when they were still going. The astronomer Galileo Galilei famously said, "I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use." In a similar fashion, the cabinet and its work groups have sought to engage with the scientific community as we have made recommendations to the cabinet, which were informed by the Centers for Disease Control, as well as from persons on these work groups themselves, from scientific and medical communities. As we have strove to live Christ's commandment to love our neighbors as ourselves, and while following John Wesley's entreaty to do no harm, we very often found ourselves guided by Christ's witness in regard to the defense of the vulnerable in our midst. On both work groups and continuing today with the PRG, we have been blessed by perspectives of clergy and laity from churches large, medium, and small, individuals who brought the best of themselves to weekly meetings and who did immense amounts of homework in between these meetings. In time, we found ourselves at once thinking like people who love and serve the Church of Jesus Christ, while also in many ways thinking like the virus, trying to imagine how each policy, each guideline, each requirement could be circumvented by COVID, and then working to reduce the risk of that circumvention as best we could. To us, this is what and faithfulness look like and continues to look like. Faith seeking understanding, uniting knowledge and vital piety, loving our neighbors by utilizing great belief in God and the intellectual tools with which God has endowed the church for such a time as this. To be completely honest, there were many times where we have felt like we were trying to design and install the landing gear on a jumbo jet filled with people we love and care about at 50,000 feet. Things kept changing and moving very quickly, and they will continue to keep changing as together we move through this ever-evolving season of pandemic. The jumbo jet seems to have now come in for a landing more quickly than any of us may have anticipated. And none of us yet know to what extent this is a landing or a layover. It's our current location that I wish to speak to for just a moment. You have repeatedly heard from the cabinet that we have used as data points the work of the CDC as well as executive orders from the governor of Virginia. Last week, the council from both changed. The CDC's recommendation states that vaccinated people, fully vaccinated people, do not need to wear face coverings except in certain situations, such as when in medical facilities or utilizing public transportation. In short order, Governor Northam followed the lead of the CDC in issuing Executive Order 79, which goes into effect on May 28th, 2021. Now, the bishop and cabinet had already been in conversation about what the next phase of the conference's response to COVID-19 would look like, even before the formation of the post-COVID resource group, the PRG. And we did this in April and unveiled it to the conference in a webinar on April 26th. Over the course of the last year, your cabinet has heard a great deal of feedback desiring a more contextualized approach to COVID safety, as well as a desire for more trust of local church clergy and lay leadership. And it's our hope that the most recent work of the new PRG work group, as well as the new latitude it contains, will provide just that. This is especially true as guidance from government and scientific communities has evolved in recent days, and as they have, we wanted to provide you with tools to bless and equip you in your ministry. As a cabinet, we feel that we are investing in you with great faith and trust, as we know you love the people and the communities you serve, and that you will continue to put to work resources we have lovingly labored to provide, as you have done for so long. And finally, in my morning prayers, I pray each and every day for our conference PRG team, for its members, for its work, and for its leader, R.J. Jun. These are immensely talented servants of Christ who need and covet our prayers, and it's my hope that you'll join me in praying for them each day as well. So thank you again for being here tonight. Thank you for holding on to this jumbo jet at different altitudes and through different measures of turbulence. The God of life is with us yesterday, today, and forever. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. And we know how much Doug had led us in this effort as he was leading not only from the cabinet, but also with the mission and ministry work group. So thank you once more. I wanted to share just a couple of frequently asked questions, and our panelists will share those. And after that, what we will actually do is we will start answering your questions. And that's where I said, use the question and answer. We'll try to answer all of them in a timely manner. But I wanted to emphasize on why a PRG, because this is what I heard, and I know it is true. A lot of people are asking, you're asking us to form another group. And in a way, I do believe, and we do believe that there needs to be a significant identity shift in the way that we see things. With the benefit of the vaccine and the benefit of all the mitigations that we had learned the past year, we are confident that the churches can make the right decision to safely open up and continue to be in ministry together. But as we are shifting, we thought that this PRG, this newly formed group, should not only focus on the safety, but also this group should be able to rethink and reshape our ministries. For the next couple of months, this will be a time where we constantly go into the cycle of rethinking and reshaping. And as we do that, we hope and we pray that we will be able to utilize the tools that we had learned in the past year and a half, and also apply it to the changing world that has been struck by COVID. My mentor, when I was academic mentor, when I was going through my THM program from Asbury, Dr. Jay Moon, had recently released a video, and he shared this quote, which actually came to my heart, and I wanted to quote him by using what he said. He shared a phrase from idiom of Ghana, because he was a missionary in Africa for a long time. And the phrase goes like this: all of the roofs leak, but we learn how to collect the water. So what happens when there's a lot of rain in a village of Ghana, the water starts to seep through the roof. And naturally, because the roof are not built the way that we built over here, the water starts dripping in. What the village had started to learn and adapt to is to put the bowls underneath the roofs that are having leak waters. And what they do is they use it as an internal plumbing. This is one more way for them not to go and make a trip onto the well, which will be a couple miles away from their house. And this water can be used to wash clothes and all the other things that are needed in a household. The moral of the story is not to be bemoaned of our situation, but learn from it. And I believe that this time of COVID, we were able to learn a lot of things. And we hope that this intentional group, the PRG, would not only talk about safety, but also talk about what we can and how we can reshape our ministries. Now we are going to switch our gears and we're going to talk about how we form our PRG. So Beth will help us to do that.
Hi, friends. So glad to have you all with us tonight. So how do we form our PRG? Well, the person who nominates the PRG will be your pastor, and your pastor can put that together. Some healthy church teams may choose to continue as the PRG, but some of those folks may want a break from that. We do suggest that you use a few of your members from the original healthy church team, but PRG is different than your healthy church team in some ways. And we ask that someone who is not the pastor and not your lay leader should be the chair of your PRG team as well. And so we want to invite you to do that. And what is the work of the PRG and how do you go about that? One of the things you're going to be doing is still working on things like the Healthy Church team did about health and how you're going to do that. But the other parts of that are going to be, you're going to look at the guidelines of the TAM that came out and all those things. But another important purpose of this is about relaunch and rethinking and reshaping your ministry. We're never going to go back to the way it always was and just fall back in our own ruts. We're going to create new ways and know that God can do a new thing through us, and we can learn new ways of doing ministry to reach people. The question I hear a lot of people say is, how do we get everybody to come back? And we're going to be able to adapt, keep adapting, and use a both and strategy. We're going to reach people continually online, but there also may be new ways to reach people in person. And so we're going to envision that each PRG team will function as this think tank for the church leadership. So we ask certain council members to be involved in PRG. And we also would like to have the churches work together to think about some of these things as they reshape and rethink ministry. And some churches may use their church council as their PRG, so that you don't have to have an additional committee, especially if you're in a smaller church, you think I have to make a new committee. No, you could use your church council as that. And again, we're going to talk about later how the church council will have final approval over those things. And you want to be able to craft a relaunch as you vision forward. If you don't have a clear vision right now, now is a great time to work together and to make that possible so that you can reach your community in new ways.
Thank you, Beth. Now Nathan is going to help us to understand a little bit more about forming consensus. Nathan, you're muted. You're Nathan, we cannot hear you.
So most of our my apologies, two different devices. So most of our churches are in a situation where we are not in one accord. We are not in a situation where we have all the churches in one belief system or one understanding of COVID-19. So it's really important for us to try to work towards consensus. One of the ways of doing this is through prayerful discernment using the brain that we've shared with the conference already. Another way is to do discernment through confession. I serve a church currently that had a variety of opinions on our PRG team. And so we took time at the beginning of our meeting to confess our own personal agendas and the places where we already had been. And in that confession, we offered inclusion to say that our opinion might not be the correct one. And so starting from that point, kind of let all the air out of the room that was tension. And we were allowed to then share in a collective sense about who we were and who God was calling us to be. Then we use the tools from this group, the brain, talking about each ministry and sharing where we feel God is leading us and discerning on how we do no harm and how we also move beyond the pandemic. Using the tools that we have available that are technology, surveys or asking congregants, listening for where congregants' views are. That's an important aspect of serving on the local PRG. Lastly, the church council as a body needs to approve the plan prior to submitting it for review to the district superintendent. This makes sure that we have the ability to have the entire church have buy-in for that to be a consensus model.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Nathan, now as we are going to do, what we're going to do now is we're going to have one more poll and then start answering your questions. I know that some people were saying, I thought you're going to answer questions. So we're going to start doing that, but we wanted to have another poll, just one more poll as we are going through this new, give me a second. I'm sorry about this. Heather is going to lead us in our polls.
Thank you, RJ. So it appears that I might be the person responsible for the polls this evening, and I'm happy to do that. Our next question pertains to outdoor gatherings. So we would like to know from our conference members, our church, which of these responses would be most appropriate for you? The first being, our church has approved fully vaccinated people to be unmasked in an outdoor setting. The second, our church has chosen to remain fully masked in an outdoor setting at this time. Or the third, yet again, our church is currently discerning this process. As we all have realized, we are in times of change, and it's taking time to find consensus amongst our church and committee members. So if that's your case, you can choose that third option. So please let us know through the poll which of those options best fits you. If one does not fully fit you, just choose the one that best fits you in your setting, and we will give you a minute to finish answering those questions.
We will give probably 20 more minutes, 20 more seconds for everyone to complete their poll. We have around 270 who had answered and participated in the poll. 5 more seconds and we will end the poll. And here's the result of our poll. 47% are allowing fully vaccinated people to unmask at outdoors gathering. A lot of 6% of the churches had decided not to, and then the churches are currently discerning. Now we're going to switch our gears to answering your questions.
Thank you, RJ. So we have some great questions, and we are so grateful for your questions and for being here. I would like to go to a question about the governor's order and trying to understand the governor's order and what that means and how it says that we can unmask. So RJ, could you take that for me?
Yes, I will start with that. So I think they're going to unpack a lot of information out of this. The first is, as you all know, CDC is a guideline, and it serves more like an advisory board. And then the governor is the one who needs to make it into a legislation. And starting from the pandemic, Virginia Annual Conference had been partnering with the governor's order and trying to make sure that all our guidelines are compatible with whatever the governor is requiring us to do. And in that, what had happened after the guideline, as we all know, on May 15th, the governor had released an amendment to Executive Order 72, which is it is affected until May 27th. And starting on midnight of May 28th, Executive Order 79 is in effect. Now, just to clarify, Executive Order 72, which I recommend that we all download it, and if you do a search, you'll be able to find the section with religious services. You'll have more understanding of that order. The governor did allow, if there are fully vaccinated individuals, they can unmask according to the guidance of the CDC. Now, Executive Order 79 is where it gets a little confusing. And I had to ask one of our PRG members who is an attorney to help us understand what this means. And she said, I think she used a term called circular law, where it sounds like it is restricting it, but at the same time, it is giving allowance for people to unmask. So therefore, the law can be confusing. So starting on May 28th, what it means that fully vaccinated members, and it is only for fully vaccinated members that they can take off their mask and social distancing can decrease. It doesn't have to be 6 foot. And what it also implies that a lot of the other restrictions that we had will be fading out. And that is the reason why we had used May 28th in the time of why the PRG, for the planning of the PRG, if any kind of safety guidelines of the PRG would take effect. So what we did on May 15th is we asked each church to activate their PRGs. And I know that it wasn't enough time. And as you all know, this was a surprise for us as well. We asked our churches to activate the PRGs. And what we did is until May 28th, there were 4 things that we allowed our churches to make changes without the approval of our DSs. Now, for the plans that will happen after May 30th, we are not asking you to resubmit the plans that you're already doing. But since we know that more than 40% of our churches are discerning what to do, we ask you to use this time to come up with a plan using the TAM phase 3. And then in the second page, you will know that there is a way to use it. We ask you to create consensus and approval by the church council, and then send it to the DS for review. So I was wondering if I answered your questions. Please let us know on the question and answer if that was a sufficient answer. And then Beth is going to lead us for the next one.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of questions, RJ, about singing in person, and are there restrictions on times of singing? Can your worship leaders be back in worship leading, singing, things like that? Who'd like to take it? Nathan, how about you? Or RJ?
So I would say, yes, Nathan.
Nathan, you're muted again, buddy.
We still can't hear you, Nathan. I don't know why.
Let me answer that question. Doug, please correct me if I'm wrong. Our provision of 5 minutes limit, our interpretation is that I'm sorry. Our interpretation is that that could be decided by the PRG after May 30th, right?
Right. And again, I think that's a very contextual question. We have sanctuaries and worship spaces and indoor worship and outdoor worship. And again, this is us trying to get away from a one-size-fits-all methodology for determining how things are happening in churches. There's some churches where you may have 50 people worshiping in a sanctuary that holds 500. That gives you some ways that you can space out, and you can sing and in ways that may be different when you have 50 people in a sanctuary that holds 100. So really that's where we would like for your PRGs to really think about that and think about what works in your context in a way that's safe and sensible. And I think, again, that's something that you can ease into. You don't need to introduce a whole lot of music right away. It may be something that you do in phases, and it's also something that you may want to, as you're doing more music, to communicate to your congregation, so that those for whom that's something they may not be comfortable with yet, that they can be aware of that as they decide whether to worship in one particular service or maybe even worship online.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Here's a question about the district superintendent review. Someone asked that they heard that the DS would have veto power on plans through July 1st, but would then only have to review those plans. It says now that we're suggesting the timeline is being updated to May 30th. Could you clarify the timeline and, again, the role of the DS?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that as a cabinet, we've talked about a great deal. And it's something that, well, as far as the timeline goes, that's been moved up. July 1st is now May the 28th. Okay, as far as that goes. But as far as review, how review changes from the approval that everyone has known up to this point, goes something like this. And this is, everything for me becomes a metaphor sooner or later. And this is one that the clergy on the Roanoke district have heard before. Up to this point, it's a bowling analogy, so forgive me. But up to this point, you know, we've been bowling with those rails that you can pull down that block the gutters. And we, at this point now, are trusting that, you know what, the churches of the Virginia Conference know how to bowl. And we're putting the rails back up again. So, you know, if what we as superintendents want to do is to be able to say, you know your context, you know your people, you know your space and your buildings and all of your resources, we're going to really put a great deal of trust in the plans that you all are making. Now, if we see you intentionally throwing the ball into the gutter or doing something that may result in that, we'll have a conversation. But we really believe that the odds of that are low. You know, I saw it in a conversation with my own clergy on the Roanoke district today. This measured approach that the clergy and the laity are wanting to take in so many situations. So, you know, it's and part of our review also requires there to be a plan, and the plan really is the result of thought and prayer and discernment and discussion that's gone into a particular plan. So there's an accountability piece. It's not as much we're going to pick through every jot and tittle in your plan, but we do want to know that you thought about it, because when we know you thought about it, we know that we can trust it. And again, we want to be able to let you love your people, love your community, and do so safely in ways that only you know how, because you are the boots on the ground.
Thank you very much. We have some questions about food and food consumption. There's a question about a common coffee pot. There's a question about, can we eat indoors? Holy Communion by intinction. Making sure I see them all. So things that have to do with food.
Can I answer that question?
Thank you.
Yes. So I'm going to share the screen and talk about brain. What we're asking is we're asking the churches to make their decisions, but when they make it, we want us to make sure that we do and go through a appropriate conversation of weighing the benefits, risk, alternative, and showing what kind of intuition that we have and see what we will lose if we don't make any changes. The reason why we say this, and we're going to continue to do this, is because after May 28th, all the questions about what we do about communion, what we do about eating, what we do about coffee pots, we're not going to answer that for you. What we will do as PRG is we will share best practices. Now, the reason why we're sharing the best practices is because in our group, we have medical professions, we have engineers, we have lawyers, and we have pastors, lay leaders who really have a lot of thought into these practices. So what we will do is we will present best practices for the churches to utilize, but the ultimate decision-making has to all come from the church, making a deliberate effort to think through using this brain system and making their decision. If we believe that some of our churches are have enough benefit of opening up a coffee pot after May 28, submit a plan according to the new TAM phase 3 and have the council. And the reason why we ask council's approval, even though it's not written out there, is because we want to make sure that the PRG has full consensus with all bodies of the church. The reason why we might not have written it down is because there are some churches that might not have that many people, and what the PRG thinks would be what the church thinks. But there are some churches where the PRG will come with a completely different deliberation, then the church, without having the accountability of the council and without having a consensus built in their decisions. So I hope that this answers a lot of your questions. What do we do with social distancing? What do we do with communion? It really is up to the careful decision of the churches and their PRGs in concert with the council.
One more question related to church council. There's a statement that says the phase 3 TAM does not mention church council approval for anything.
And like I said, yes, the stage 3 TAM, we did not put it, and we had developed a frequently asked question that will be released after this webinar. The reason why we did it is because we need to have accountability. So the accountability of the ACT was our district superintendents. Our district superintendents received all the plans and they were the ones who were approving it. Then the question for PRG, who is going to be that accountable part? Like I said, there will be some PRGs, and ideally what we want our PRGs, how we want our PRGs to function is to be a task force of the council. So when the PRG comes with a recommendation and a plan, the council would be the accountability part of approving that plan. And with that, upon approval, what would happen? The pastor will submit the plan to the district superintendent for review and review only. Now,
So for a lot of churches, this might actually be the same group of people. Smaller churches might have the church council be the PRG team. And obviously the pastor has kind of official stamp of approval with worship.
and that's where we did it, write it down in the new TAM phase 3, because we knew that all churches have different contexts.
Absolutely. There's a question about social distancing. Will we have to continue social distancing? Goes a little bit similar to what you're saying, that when PRG is in effect making decisions, you want them to make those decisions. Anything else you want to say about social distancing and how long that it's in effect?
So I'm going to talk about the law first.
Okay.
And then I'm going to talk about the practices. So according to Executive Order 79, the governor does say that fully vaccinated members can unmask and they can walk away from social distancing. And if you see underneath, there's only a verse that it says proper distancing is required, which means that it's not 6 feet anymore. But let me ask the question of what comes up a lot. How are we going to verify who's vaccinated and who is not? So the church needs to come up with best practices of finding where would be the medium between what the law says and between the best practice to keep our members safe. And in a way, your first reaction would be, that's confusing, you didn't answer my question. And I have to share that we're not answering the questions for you, we're helping the churches to come and answer the question in the best way.
And I mean, I think that's part of one of the things that's different about PRG and HCT. So HCT was this very sort of defined thing, and these are the rules you had to follow. I mean, I think that's how people felt about PRG, is that we want to equip you and empower you with tools to answer these questions and to make your plans. We've given you the tools to build the kind of ministry you need and to relaunch new ministry. There is a question about, do we need to continue with the health acknowledgement form, the health acknowledgement questions?
I can answer that. That needs to be something that each individual PRG team decides through prayerful discernment about how they want to do that. There's options. You can do a self check-in before you enter in, or you can continue. That's something the local church can decide.
And can I go back to something Beth said for just a moment? Remember that the PRG is not just a renamed Healthy Church team, but it's also a body who is to be thinking broadly about ways to re-engage ministry that has not been able to be done in an ideal way or at all over the course of the last year. So let's say there's a new neighborhood being built across the street from the church, and the PRG team could say, you know what, we need to form a ministry that helps us to reach out to our new neighbors And it's the second side of the coin. How can we do that in a way that is safe? So it's not just about keeping safe. It's also about thinking about ways that we can be in ministry in new ways, but to also do it knowing that we're in a COVID context.
Absolutely.
So also there's been some questions about the difference between fully vaccinated and unvaccinated. Are we creating some kind of non-inclusive environment? And some folks have even expressed they are in a particular political areas get anxious to either unmask real quickly or maybe not to unmask real quickly. And trying to avoid creating an us versus them would be the goal of the church. We already have enough of that in the world. We don't need any more of it. And so no one needs to ever go around polling people, whether they're masked or unmasked. Nobody needs to assume things. Shame does not belong in church. We should allow folks to take care of their health and their risks on their own health in this content, in this particular time.
There is a question about the state of Virginia is allowing unvaccinated children to be unmasked during outdoor recess. Assuming distancing is possible, can we allow this during VBS, small groups, etc.?
And I'll go back to the same answer that I've been saying. If it is after May 28th, the PRG should come up with the plan and then make their decision. What if I do this? What if I share a sample map plan that has been written on my for my function? So I'm going to shamefully advertise our community kits and can collection during the annual conference on June 19th. We are asking the churches to collect modified kits and also food for us to contribute to our local ministries, and there will be a district site. So that district site meeting, the district site meeting came up with, what do we do with our volunteers? So what we wanted to do is we wanted to use the new TAM Phase 3 and write down a couple of things of sharing how this might allow us to make the right decision. So the name of the event will be Community Cans and Kits, and it is on June 19th, 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. The churches are to bring the collected goods. So we asked to collect them 3-4 weeks prior and bring it to the district site. The first thing is hygiene. What will we do? So this is what I had written. This is solely what I written. We will provide the hygiene or sanitations. We will provide hand sanitizations for volunteers who receive collected goods from church participations at the drive-through event. Ideally, the churches will pop up their trunk and the volunteer will unload the collected good. However, the church member can help who is driving, which I meant. Physical distancing. Each vehicle will be wait out until the drop-off is completed. Non-volunteers are recommended to stay in their vehicles. Volunteer will be asked to maintain proper physical distancing at all time, and you will know that I use proper instead of 6 feet. The mask, we strongly recommend all volunteers to maintain well-fitted masks. This is for the people who might not have been able to fully vaccinated. And considering that this event will be held outdoors, fully vaccinated people may take off their masks when needed, according to the CDC guidelines. When knowing that majority of the volunteers are vaccinated and being outdoors, unvaccinated members might choose to take off their masks. And this is per the CDC guideline. The screening will be, we will use the health screening poster to make sure no one is showing symptoms that volunteers. And then for 5 and 6, there is nothing that applies. The reason why I wrote this and I want to share this is because I just want to share the process. This was written by myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present it to our Community Kits and Can Committee, which for us will be like the PRG, and they will adopt it. And they will have to find an entity who approves this, which is also our homework. But I just wanted to show the process of how this works. It is not as strict as it was for the TAM, but we ask and we strongly recommend that you use the TAM as a reference. Use what you had learned and what you had been doing for the past 1.5 years. And then help us to come up, I hope that will help you to come up with a plan that will be approved and had consensus among all the church bodies that could be reviewed to our district superintendents.
RJ, there continues to be a question related to Executive Order 79. It says, Executive Order 79 does not say you can't unmask. I posted it and put there's a hyperlink in the executive order that takes you back to the CDC, which shares that fully vaccinated people can unmask, but folks are worried that that is putting words into the executive order. So can you help explain? One of the things I think the lawyer on our team talked about was that it was a circular law. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I wish that I had the full understanding of circular law, but what I heard from her her interpretation is that this is a very confusing way. Now, don't take my words, but what the governor is doing is saying that you're still asked to wear your mask. But if you are fully vaccinated, refer to what the CDC says. And according to the CDC, if you are fully vaccinated, and that means that 2 weeks ago that you had either your second shot of Moderna or Pfizer or your first shot of J&J, and in past 2 weeks, you are categorized as fully vaccinated, and you can take off your mask indoors and outdoors, and social distancing is not required at that moment. So it could be confusing, but that's what it means. It sounds like it is required, but in essence, it is not for fully vaccinated members only.
Doug, would you like to add to that?
Well, as I read the Executive Order 79 under Section C, subsection G, it says that the masks can be removed when necessary to participate in a religious ritual. So
we're almost already exempt in that.
Doug, is that Executive Order Amended 72?
No, I'm talking about 79.
79.
A religious exemption was in 72 as well, I believe.
Yeah, I'm getting ahead of things. But 79 does say that.
I have a question. Someone says, we have 2 non-UMC churches that have used facilities before COVID, but have not met since. We want to bring them back using the guidelines that our PRG Church Leadership Council and DS approves. Are there any restrictions to tenant churches meeting under our church's guidelines?
I don't know that that's something that that we've addressed up to this point, other than the expectation that they would follow, that they would be following the same guidelines that the congregation would fulfill. But I don't know if that's something that the PRG team has dealt with or not.
We have not dealt with it, and we believe that that is more of a trustee and council issue, and that's where the PRG can come with some kind of guidelines.
Yeah, I would say that as long as you feel that people can meet the obligations that you set forward under your PRG and church council that approved by your, reviewed by your DS, as long as you can trust that they would abide by those rules, continue to do ministry. Questions about how does new information impact the youth ministry and vacation Bible school restrictions that we've already been given by the conference? Can we, with PRG approval, do things that those documents prohibited?
So as the chief author of the VBS document that the M&M group presented, that was written the week after Christmas. And a lot has transpired since then. And we had to produce that document with the best information we had at the time and not being able to really see too far into the future. But with the PRG permission for Vacation Bible School, I would see you, yes, being able to do things that are currently prohibited in that document, as long as you all can do them safely and in ways that that care for the children in your midst. I do think that ministries involving children require an extra layer of oversight simply because of the slower rollout for vaccination for children. But yes, I would say that the the work of the PRG now supersedes the M&M Vacation Bible School document that went out earlier this year.
Question here. It seems to be contrary to the Book of Discipline and our polity that we are taking worship decisions to church council. I liked that with the HCT to provide input to the pastor for worship and assumed it would be the same with PRG.
Can I answer that one?
Yes.
So PRG is not only about in-person worship. I think our focus is too much on in-person worship. And I also want to add, PRG is not only about safety guidelines. This group is a think tank for the church of rethinking and reshaping what our ministry would look like. So I want to start with that. And then going on to the worship decisions at the council. Of course, all churches are different, but there are some churches that have worship committees who make decisions and recommendations in consultation with the pastor. So in those kind of situations, the pastor shouldn't have the sole decision of making all safety guidelines from the PRG. And
Yes.
Can I share one more thing about masks?
Absolutely.
I wanted to share this. By this new guideline, the churches can make their own decisions about unmasking people. And we all know we come into a dilemma of what about the unvaccinated people? Will they really have a mask? There's a lot of considerations that are made. But I want also to have us to focus on to this, not only in the safety or requirements. I want to talk about leadership as well. When we're making these decisions and saying that fully vaccinated people can take off their mask, we need to consider whether or not we are not considering the families who have children who are not vaccinated yet. We have to ask ourselves and think, are we not considering the ones who might have medical reasons for not being able to be vaccinated? So what it brought to me is a practice that I had when I was in the Army. I was serving the U.S. Army as a Katusa for 2 years. And one of the things that we do in the U.S. Army is you need to do push-ups. And every 3 months, you'll have a physical exam to make sure that you're able to give at least 60 push-ups in 2 minutes. So when we have our new recruits coming in, they don't really meet that threshold. So what we're asked to do is, as a superior, we're asked to ask our new recruits to do push-ups. So throughout the day, there'll be random moments where we'll just say, give me 20, and then that person has to go and do the push-ups. But in order for us to not to abuse our power, what we were directed to do is if we ask 20, we give 22. So both of us will be doing push-ups together. And I wanted to just present that we have to see things in that leadership perspective, not about is this permissible? Because like Paul has said, everything is permissible, but everything might not be beneficial. So let's focus on to that.
Yeah, thank you, RJ. There continue to be questions feeling like we're taking away power from pastors because the Book of Discipline says the pastor makes the decision regarding worship, and that felt like they were taking away that power. And I think that what we're saying, sorry, can you get my kids to be quiet? I understand that what you just said was a great example of leadership done well, that you don't abuse your power. And so we're asking everyone to be good and effective leaders, that you can say, lead and tell your church council, this is what I think is best. And you are including them in the process so that you can be best supported. I mean, things are only going to go well if you have buy-in and investment from those with you. Is there anything else you all would add about that concern about, are we taking away power from the Book of Discipline?
Well, remember that the council is beholden to the same Book of Discipline as the pastor is. So, that would be a limitation of something that the council would have to know its own limits. when it comes to the pastor's role in making determinations about worship. And I would just quickly add to what RJ said about how we unveil and roll out this process is that you don't have to utilize every permission that's been granted to you all at once. And what I'm finding are churches that I'm talking to are using a gradual approach, and they're doing it in great dialogue with the membership. They're doing it in listening sessions. They're doing it in small groups. They're finding ways to have that conversation, and at best, they're rooting these conversations about how are we going to live into this new normal within the context of who is God calling us to be for such a time as this. So that the conversation about safety is never extricated from the conversation about discernment and who God is calling the church to be. And Beth, you're muted. All right.
Okay, thank you. Had to get the dogs to be quiet. There is a question about transporting youth. At one point, we had talked about not transporting them in a mission team, a trip, or in a van and things like that. So can we speak about that question about when it gets to youth ministry?
So one of the things that I know that our PRG discussed a lot last night when we were working on our thing was about vulnerable persons and persons who do not have the ability to get vaccinated, or because of the current timing, because teenagers were just recently allowed to get the vaccine, the timing and such. So we recommended that, and again, the language is recommended. We recommended that all those who were working with our youth wear masks, simply to be a little bit more cautious. And in transporting kids, obviously, there's some other safe sanctuary stuff to deal with, but as far as the COVID thing goes, it'd be recommended that those who are working with you just take an extra sense of precaution, because you're the one who's the possibility of putting that youth at risk.
RJ, I think Heather had a question, had something to add there. Can you unmute her?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. And I think that also we just need to keep in mind that the Virginia Conference is a very large conference, and regionally speaking, these are the folks that know their families best. They need to remember to stay aware of the protocols that are in their municipalities. Maybe there's something happening in their local areas that's different from the rest of the state. And that's one of the beauties of a PRG, is that being a more localized effort, they know their community best. They know the concerns and can respond more quickly than an institution the size of the Virginia Conference is at this point.
So a lot of the questions that we hear is, what can we do in this situation? Like I said, we will be functioning to provide best practices that you can utilize. But the decision of what we can do in terms of what about small groups, what about youth ministry, it really has to be a decision that we trust that the PRGs will make the right one. The other question that we had is, does it mean that every single change that we make has to be written in the map, the second page of the TAM? Like I said, it is really more for consensus. So it doesn't have to be elaborate, but with that consensus that is passed by the council and having accountability, that could be shared with the district superintendent. I'm gonna make sure that Doug is in agreement in what I said. And you don't have to wait for the district superintendent to reply back on that. Doug, did I represent this right?
Yes. Yeah, you did.
Sorry, I was reading another question. What was the question?
Oh, the question was about DS review.
Yes.
Okay. So the DS review is different than approval, if that was what the part was, in that a review means that the DS will look at it, glance at it, try to keep you within the, like the bumper idea with the bowling alley lane. And the other aspect of that is that that's the last step. You know, it starts with the PRG committee, it goes through church council. They can be the same group of people, and then it goes beyond that. Obviously, we've been addressing the other stuff about worship.
Few questions. There's one that we had at one point that was, can you give an example of something that's out of the bumper zone?
Oh, man. I can't.
He has a good
Make
one.
something up.
He has a good one.
Now, there's one that we use kind of as a placeholder in some of our discussion. I'll give you a better one than this, but the one that we keep using is bobbing for apples in a kissing booth. Way in the gutter if you were to do either one of those. But really, I mean, if you, let's say, I'm just trying to think of things. If let's say you wanted to have an event that was far larger than your space could hold, you know, that would be a situation where, because, you know, you would have people crammed together so tight. So I would have a conversation with you about that. And maybe if, you know, for instance, can you do part of it outdoors, and what would that look like? It's those kinds of things. It wouldn't be, you know, are you having a revival? Well, revivals are forbidden or whatever. It's codified somewhere. Here it would be, you know, your map, your plan that would be submitted to us would probably have covered that anyway. So I really think that, you know, the bowling ball in the gutter is going to be much more the exception than the rule, because of, like I said in my initial comments about the investing that we're doing in you all by trusting you all.
Yeah, I think one of the great things is that I think I've heard from churches a lot. It says, we're smart people. Why doesn't the conference trust us to make good decisions? And we do. The conference does trust you all to make your thoughtful, smart, caring churches. And now we'd like you to utilize all those things. There's a question here. It says, so if the pastor is recommending a cautious phased approach to relaunching to keep everyone safe, and the council says, open the doors wide open, then the pastor is obligated to go with the council's decision? No mask, no social distancing, everything is back as it was 14 months ago? This sounds like what you're saying. Is that correct?
So a big part of this is going to be a conversation, like everything else that happens in church. It's a conversation between leadership and laity, between clergy and laity, between all of it. And a huge aspect of this is going to be that if it affects the pastor in particular, I'm just going to be honest with this. So a good example I will give you is if a church asks, their PRG team says, Pastor, we think you ought to unmask when you preach. We really want you to do that. And the pastor is not comfortable doing that. Then the pastor has the right to say, no, I'm not comfortable doing this. Likewise, if they say, Pastor, we want you to start hugging and handshaking again and stuff. And if the pastor's not comfortable doing that, the pastor has the veto because it affects them to say, no, I'm not comfortable with this. Pastors should not feel like they have to do something that's outside of their own risk assessment, their own discernment about what is a healthy church for them and their families.
Great question. RJ, will you answer this question? It says, our church currently has 50% of pre-COVID attendance, and it's likely that some members will not return no matter the health precautions we take. We are struggling to reinstate existing ministries or implement new ministries with our small numbers. Are there any resources or help for our churches in our situation?
And I think this is the question that we really want to address in our PRG groups. And that's what our group will continue to resource some ways. Now, one thing is, like Richard had said, it might not go back to March 2020. So we are asking each and every one of our churches to go through a process of rethinking and reshaping their ministries. Now, for the resources, I would say next week and the week after, that's why we have hybrid worship. Now, I know that hybrid worship can be seen like it is only for larger or mid-sized churches, but there are things that we can pick up from hybrid worship and reach out to that 50% who might not come back to our churches. If we think that 100% of our members are going to come back, it's really going to be something that we misalign ourselves in. So that's why we're trying to help our churches to rethink and reshape as they are relaunching their ministry. And when we relaunch our ministries, it might not look like March 2020.
And I would just really quickly add to that, one of the best resources we have in our United Methodist system is the connectional nature of it. And so some of the best resources we have are each other. And I encourage you to, especially if you're a pastor, if you're a lay leader, there's a United Methodist Church that's in your community, who you can, who's got information that may be useful to you. You may have information that's useful to them. And that's one of the reasons that I try to meet with the clergy on my district every week, is because what I find is that they talk to each other about the wonderful ideas they're coming up with and planting seeds in each other's churches. This is just not a time for a Lone Ranger approach, but it's a great time to really lean on each other.
Is there anything we can say about, there's a concern that the conference is wanting us to do more than what the government wants us to do. And people feel fearful that the conference has been overbearing. Any thoughts about how we can respond to that?
So the question is, like now people feel like we're kind of encouraging people to do more than what the governor has permitted, or did I misunderstand that?
I think it's actually the opposite, that we're still being too restrictive of, and I believe the question may have overtones of religious freedom, that we're somehow restricting religious freedom.
Any thoughts on how we can respond to that?
I would say this, the governor's order is a way, yes, it is restricting, but we always have to remember that it is for fully vaccinated people. Now, there are some exemptions, like Doug had mentioned, for unvaccinated people to take off their mask during religious services, but that's really more like communion. So what we are doing is we are saying that if the church in your context is close to feeling free, that you can take off your mask, that's what you're allowed to do. But we also have to remember, we have 1,000 churches that have different contexts. And we need to give and empower the churches to make their decision that is most appropriate and safe for the members of the church. So that's why we have purposely not answered any of your questions that asking, can we do this or can we do that? Because we're not going to answer that. We're trying not to answer that because we know that the churches can make their deliberate decision, keeping all the members safe and allowing us to continue to do ministry.
Another question, in response to resources to help churches in our situations about the, trying to bring the attendance back or people back, the PRG webinars that are every Thursday will be incredible resources to help with this. The K Catan workshop next week, right, RJ?
Yes.
The workshop with Jason Moore about both and. All of those are going to be helpful resources to help churches reach people. They may not all come back in person, but it'll be ways to reach them where they are in those places. There continues to be a question about, if you are not in the agreement with the council's decision, does the pastor have the final say of what is best for the community? Thoughts?
I would go back to that this is a fluid conversation. The pastor, I think, only has the authority that is given to the pastor by the community when it comes to the community's own. So there's, when the question says, does the pastor have the final say for what is in the best interest of the community. In some instances that may be true, but in many instances that may not be true. That's kind of like, asking, do I have the ability in the pulpit to say, everybody needs to take vitamin D at this many milligrams? That might be in the best interest of the community, but I don't think necessarily that's sometimes my role or the authority that's been placed or given to me within my ordination. It needs to be much more of a fluid, dynamic conversation where there's some give and take and understanding about roles.
Now, I'm gonna tread onto some of the in-between lines. For the council to approve, then what we said is the pastor needs to submit the plan for the district superintendent's review. So the implementation actually starts when we submit the review, right? What if it is a egregious matter that the pastor halts that review? I'm just asking a question for our churches to make their decision. Now, I think we are approaching a time that we have promised and we should be ending. So I wanted to share just a couple announcements of like what Beth had said about our future 2 more PRG relaunch webinars. One would be about Kay Katan's book. And if you see here, I hope that I can see it. What we did is we had ordered these books, Being the Church in the Post-Pandemic World. And it has a subtitle of having the ultimate playbook for relaunch. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to give this out to churches. So what we are doing is we are asking the churches, when you are registering next week, what we're going to do, we're going to have a random raffle, and we're going to give this out to the people who had participated, hoping that this would be a tool for our churches to think about rethinking and reshaping our ministries. The other part would be Jason Moore's, and it's about hybrid worship. And it is distinctly focusing on what we're going to do in worship. How are we going to continue worship? It's not only having broadcasts, it'll be a couple other ways of how we can reach out to our people. But I wanted to go back to what Doug had said. I really believe in our connectional system, we really need to learn from one another. So I hope that this will be a time where these conversations will happen more fluidly between other pastors as well. So as a matter of fact, what happened last time was after our webinar, I had a pastor who had contacted me and we had a conversation over Zoom. And she had said that this one-on-one interaction was much more helpful. And I hope that we will be able to be that person for one another as we are walking into this new reality of ministry. I want to thank you for your time joining us today. I hope that we had answered your questions. I know with the time limit that we have and the participant number that we have, I know that we weren't able to answer every single one of your questions, but I wanted to say once more, on behalf of everyone, we truly appreciate your heart to continue to serve the kingdom and continue to do it in a safe and also effective way. So thank you once more for joining us. We're going to have a time to close in prayer, and I'm going to invite Heather to join us, close us in prayer.
Thank you, RJ. I want to share a reflection as a parent that I was realizing here as we were talking through everything, and that is that I live here in the Shenandoah Valley, and I have been challenged to find activities for my daughter and an exchange student that's staying with us during the beginning times of the pandemic. And we decided to go hiking. And I began to feel a little bit like Moses because Jasinia's father was not able to go with us and we were on our own. And I remember feeling very concerned because I wasn't just walking in the woods by myself. I was walking in the woods with my girls. And I was so very grateful when I realized the markers on the trails. I realized that with each step that we took, we would have the guidance of the marker on the trail to let us know where we needed to go. And that's so very reassuring as leaders to know that we have people that have gone before us that have done the work and have done their very best to keep us safe. And I have been grateful as laity to the pastors of this conference to do their level best in trying to keep us safe and to keep us moving in a forward direction. And we did get back to our car for anyone who was wondering, and we did not see any bears on that walk. If you want to find out more about our personal reflection on bears encounters, you can stay tuned for another more interesting webinar, I'm sure. But in any case, I want to close with a prayer that was shared with me by a very dear pastor. Let us pray. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know. Be still and be still. Just be. Dear Lord, we thank you for calling us into being. We thank you for walking with us where we go. And in a time where stillness is so very far away, we ask that you still our hearts, that you still our minds, that you still the chaos that surrounds us as individuals and us as the church. Bless each level of our leadership, from the bishop all the way to the laity, all the way to the child that was just baptized. Let us remember that we are so varied in our positions, in our ages, and in our perspectives. But that's what makes us beautiful, God, because in that full reflection, we are you. And we can just be knowing that you are there with us. So as we go, let us remember that we can be our very best, that we can be grace to the world, that we can go from our churches and be your light in a moment that light and love is needed. So help us to be our very best. May the grace and peace of God go with each of you as you leave this webinar tonight. And God bless all of us as we go. Amen.
Thank you very much. If you want to have a CEU, there's a link on the side of your chat that we have put in the CEU unit. We want to thank you for your participation. There's also a QR code where you can use your phone and get directed to the link as well. We want to thank you and want to make sure that everyone understands that your voices will be heard, and we hope that we'll be able to answer it. But we trust you that you will do the best for all our churches. Thank you very much for your time and joining us. And I hope that we will join us next week as well. I want to thank all the panelists. Thank you. Goodbye. Good night, everyone. Thank you.